the sun rises over the hills of Judea. You stand on Mount Scopus as the past and the present cling to each other, and you think of the pledge made by generations of Jews for so many centuries. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. Let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, if I remember thee not. The history of Scopus is a proud and ancient one, entwined with that of the Jewish people and Jerusalem for thousands of years. Today, on this mountaintop, that unity continues, as the cherished Hadassah Hospital, once the temple of medicine in the Middle East, comes to life again, a symbol of the Jewish people who have ever risen from the ashes of destruction and who have survived. Two 2,000 years ago, the Roman Emperor Titus stood on this mountaintop and looked down on the golden city of Jerusalem. He beheld the temple, and he planned the destruction of the Jewish people. 2,000 years ago, Jews walked these streets near the temple area, streets that have been rediscovered only recently. They bathed in this mikveh before entering the holy places. Here their warriors fought the mighty Roman Empire for 4 terrible years. Titus destroyed the temple. He brought its holy relics back to Rome in triumph, but he could not destroy the Jewish people. Many Jews were dispersed to other lands in the Middle East, but Jerusalem remained their beacon. Across the mountains came the message of a continuing tradition. The first signal fire came from Scopus. Its light signaled the next torch to be lit on the mountain beyond, and the next, until finally it could be seen as far as Babylonia, and the diaspora appeared as a great campfire. Thus did each Jew know that he was not alone, that he was part of the whole. And the first signal came from Scopus. Centuries later, Scopus signaled again, a signal sent by Hadassah, that instead of destruction, here there shall be healing. The pledge was made in the 1930s. The need for a great hospital in Palestine was overwhelming. It was also out of the question. And so in 1936, Hadassah broke ground for their out-of-the-question hospital. It rose before the astonished eyes of all Jerusalem. The big shots and the workers drank wine together and toasted the future. How bright it seemed. The new director was Dr. Chaim Yaski, an eye doctor who had come here from Odessa years ago. He began his new life in Palestine by traveling on horseback, treating the terrible eye diseases that were so prevalent then. Henrietta Zold spotted him as the future director. As always, her choice was wise. His life would be entirely devoted to this hospital. So would his death. The hospital was meant to be an island of healing for Arab and Jew alike. And here in East Jerusalem, it would be available to all. In 1939, the doors opened. Everybody came. The pioneer Jews from the kibbutzim, the religious Jews from the old city, Arabs, many from the ruling families in neighboring lands. All were welcome. Palestine at last had a modern hospital. And she also had many of the great Jewish doctors of Europe who had fled Hitler's madness. Scopus became the pride of the Middle East. When World War II ended, Hadassah invited Dr. Eli Davis to become its deputy director.
When I first saw Scopus, nearly 30 years ago, it was an overwhelming experience. I can still recall the tingle. I was confronted with a most elegant hospital, beautiful, one of the most beautiful I'd ever seen, with an interior to match the exterior, and a setting to match this jewel of a hospital. And there was an atmosphere of service and scholarship which permeated the whole of the staff. I recall that we had a visit of one of the United Nations commissions, and one of the members of the commission said to me, "Why? This is just the sort of hospital I expect to see in London or New York."
But the fate of the hospital will be tied to the fate of Jerusalem. And by 1948, the times had become perilous. As the potential for a Jewish state in Palestine became more real, Arab terrorism increased. The day-to-day functioning of the hospital became more and more difficult, for its isolated location had placed it in great jeopardy. The short ride from town to the hospital was almost entirely through enemy territory, and the Arabs were determined to cut the hospital off from Jerusalem. They were succeeding. Ambulances had to be armored, so were the buses. Food and supplies were trucked in under a hail of bullets. Often the slow-moving convoys could not get through, and it took drivers like Benjamin Adine speeding non-stop through side roads to keep the supplies coming when they came. A facade of normalcy tried to cover the rising desperation. The hospital was under siege.
Yes, during the time of the siege, morale and the ability of the people to do remarkable things under deteriorating physical conditions was very striking. This in spite of the fact that day by day we heard news of a colleague being killed, a nurse being wounded, sniping in a bus, sometimes with a death, bringing patients to the hospital. But the staff morale rose and rose. We treated all the patients who were cut off in the hospital, quite a number of wounded who were reaching the hospital, and yet at the same time we became the victims of very peculiar siege conditions. The place was crowded with people who could not leave. It was almost impossible to use the toilet facilities, the plumbing facilities, virtually no water. And this produced, as you can imagine, a kind of irritability which went side by side with a terrific heroism. And yet, during this period, Dr. Yaski's foresight again showed itself in a remarkable manner. He'd already begun to prepare in the city itself, in the heart of the city, alternative hospitals and alternative operating theaters in case the facilities on the hill itself were cut off and unavailable to the city. It was decided that Dr. Yaski and I would alternate 1 week in the hospital on Mount Scopus, 1 week in town.
On April 13th, it was Dr. Yaski's turn to go up in the convoy. As usual, in armor-plated ambulances and buses, like these. Tin-plated armor, a poor shield against bullets, but better than none. They will see nothing while on this trip. Heat, claustrophobia, a tiny slit for the driver.
The convoy with Dr. Yaski, Mrs. Yaski, physicians in the leading car, patients, staff, university staff, set off for Scopus.
But this time, 78 of them would never return from this mission of healing. Survivor Esther Passman-Epstein remembers.
We were told by the driver that we passed the mosque, and oh boy, we all felt wonderful. We thought that from now on it was going to be easy going up because the British were in the houses, these very beautiful houses on the road there. And we had just passed the turn, and when it seemed as though the whole world was coming down on us. It was such noise, and we were attacked.
And from this corner shot started shooting very, very much. There was so much shooting from both sides that was...
Survivor Benjamin Adine drove a truck in the convoy.
And here we are exactly at the place where the mine blows up. That's why the convoy stopped. And here is also the place where Dr. Yaski was killed.
Yaski, killed by a bullet. A freak shot through a tiny hole in the ambulance, a hole that once held a screw. Yaski, dead. Behind him, crippled ambulances, buses, and trucks, filled with people, unable to move, waited like sitting ducks on the open road for 6 long hours. And no help came.
The Haganah couldn't come to help us, and the British didn't want to help us, so in a few hours later, the Arabs brought petrol and they put on the buses and they burned them. We couldn't even recognize the faces of the people that were burned in the buses.
The tragedy was being watched from the rooftops of Jerusalem and the roof of the hospital. The cars could be seen burning. The bullets could be seen hitting the sides of the cars. There were British troops stationary 1 block away. The Haganah straining at the leash but never getting into action. Magnus reaching the High Commissioner, getting all kinds of promises. Reaching the chief British general, who had gone on a mission out of town, passing the scene about half an hour before the actual slaughter began. Nothing could be done.
And we buried them in one big grave because we couldn't recognize the faces, who is which.
The shock to Jerusalem was profound, and yet the following morning, we all got out of our paralysis, out of our anesthesia. We were galvanized into action. The hospitals that Yaski had prepared began to function. The operating theater was working day and night. We had all the advanced medical equipment brought down in good time. But we had no petrol, benzene, oil, whatever you like, to keep the sterilizers burning. And it became my chief task to go around to my best friends in Jerusalem and the leading citizens of Jerusalem and to beg not money, not equipment, but bottles of benzene, one after the other, to keep the sterilizers going. Indeed, on several occasions, I came back to the operating theater with the teams at a standstill. An emergency patient on the table couldn't go forward. The sterilizers had all stopped. 3 or 4 bottles started them off again, while the next bottles were being sought for.
Just 1 short month after the tragic ambush, the State of Israel is born. Jerusalem divided is the harsh price of peace. And the great hospital is exiled to no man's land. For 19 long years it will be under UN supervision and policed by Israel, waiting. This beautiful building, this noble edifice, run down, scarred with shell holes, its pipes stopped up, its sewers leaking, a home for flies. It will heal no one, neither Arab nor Jew. But Hadassah is forever part of this city. Its hospitals will never leave. They will be transplanted, like olive trees, to live and grow wherever they are put. For Hadassah will always remain in Jerusalem. That is the commitment. During the coming years, Dr. Davis leaves administrative work. Succeeding him as director is Dr. Kalman Mann. He will be their tower of strength. Dr. Mann recalls those temporary buildings and those days.
Obviously, they were never meant to be hospitals. And yet, they helped us in this transition period, when the whole state of Israel was really in a ma'abara status, in tents and huts. We were, in a way, also in a ma'abara status. Ma'abara means transition. All the hundreds of thousands of new immigrants were housed in transitional buildings, and Hadassah was housed in the transitional building with them. In a way, we showed our identification also in spirit with them. Our Ma'abara life, our transition life, lasted 13 years.
The bar mitzvah present was Ein Karam, a magnificent hospital that offered everything Hadassah's doctors and nurses had dreamed of for so long. And the Hebrew University Hadassah Medical School finally had a proper home.
Now, this is a very big load that Hadassah has undertaken, to train the future generation of medical people, because during the last war, let us say, out of the 400 physicians on the Sinai borders, 300 were Hadassah-trained people.
1967. Jerusalem is reunited.
On the second day after the 67 war, we went up to Scopus, this time again as owners.
We went on the roof of the Mount Scopus Hospital of Hadassah, and I raised the flag up. There was a great honor for me, and I started to cry when I did it. It was from happiness that we got back Mount Scopus.
I can see the mountains of Moab. And virtually opposite, on those mountains, is the spot where Moses looked upon the promised land from Mount Nebo. And yet we have a privilege greater than that of Moses. We are here in the land, not merely in the land, we're on Scopus. He merely could see.
Plans for rebuilding and restoring the Hadassah University Hospital begin. It will reflect the visionary leadership of Dr. Mann. Under him, the new director of Scopus will be Dr. Yuri Kassis. Hadassah decides to keep the original facade of the buildings, a sentimental and expensive decision. It is cheaper to destroy and start anew, but that is not the Hadassah way. Rather, preserve and restore. Cherish what is noble. The insides are gutted. A new hospital shall arise here within the arms of the old one, and beyond it. They say that it takes 5 to 7 years to build any hospital, and by the time it is finished, it is already obsolete. Medicine changes so fast. But the new Scopus will be a hospital for the 1980s, ready for the future. It will be more than 3 times the size of the old one. Yet because more is given to each patient, it will care for fewer patients. The dark blue shows the original building that is being renovated. The light blue are the new additions. Times change a great deal since 1948.
In emergency, and I remember this hospital because I worked here from 47.
Scopus Administrator Dov Volotsky.
We had a room for emergency with 1 bed.
1 bed?
Yes, this was the emergency. You didn't have that automobile accident because in Jerusalem, maybe we had 20 automobiles. I don't remember how many. We had many doctors, but he couldn't afford to have a car. Yes, but 3 doctors had with cars, I remember. And today you need a parking space for 600 cars. So today we build up an emergency room which has 800 square meters. Because you need a cluster room, you need an emergency operating room, you need a resuscitation unit, and you need a hall of 13 beds for patients. And where is the auxiliary services around? A doctor's room, a nurse's station, a small room for showing the little cuts. So these old services became tremendous.
And the reality of life in Israel requires that an underground hospital be built too, in case of attack. Scopus will be part of the great Ein Kerem complex, where they come from all parts of Jerusalem and beyond. They are flooding the place. Ein Kerem is feeling the pressure for space and staff. Jerusalem is growing. 500,000 is the projected number. And who is to take care of them when they are sick? All the children of East Jerusalem shall come here. The Jewish kids from the new apartments that house tens of thousands of immigrant Jews, they shall come. And the Arab children from the Muslim villages that dot the landscape around Scopus, they shall come. And from the restored Jewish quarter of the old city shall come the Jews who have had their ancient homes returned to them. They shall all come. And on Israel's Independence Day, the marvelous mosaic of people and cultures that is Jerusalem gather at David's Tower in the citadel. Here in this biblical setting, all people join together in peace and goodwill. They shall all come, and for all there shall be the same welcome, the same high standards of health and healing, the standards of Hadassah. Scopus's pediatrics department, like Ein Kerem's, shall have as near to a home atmosphere as possible. Outside, the parents sit close to their children and close to each other. Often, a stretcher is put up in these halls at night for a relative to sleep on. At Scopus, there will be special facilities built in, not improvised, for the parent to sleep over. When the rooms are washed, all the beds move out into the halls. This Arab mother has been taught to check the intravenous for her seriously ill child. A Jewish mother comes over to see how the baby is doing. Her husband was killed in the Yom Kippur War. Later, the visit is returned with a cup of tea for the Jewish child. A mother is a mother is a mother. That is universal. And there is nothing more important in life than to make your child well. And there are those marvelous moments for a mother when a very sick child finally can stand up. Bravo. Bravo. All of Ein Kerem's rehabilitation unit will move over to the expanded facilities of Scopus. They will be the largest in Israel. Heart attack, stroke, accidents, these are the universal troubles of peacetime. But there are the tragedies of war, which strike down the young and the beautiful. And these are the troubles that cut at the heart of Israel. They will be the special concern of Scopus.
Elas, we're going to teach you to fall and to get up from the floor.
Avi Eilat was shot in the spine during the Yom Kippur War. He has lost the use of both legs, but he has come a long way. He is prepared to face anything, even falling down.
תיפול 1, 2, זרוק. יופי. מצוין.
He was a kibbutznik who ran a half-track and loved farming. He won't run that half-track anymore, but he will live a fuller life than you might think. During the past year of training here, he has learned to be independent. That is the key word in rehab. Make it on your own, and he does. In the new Scopus gym, there will be everything boys like Avi will need. There will be lots of space and the most modern equipment available and the most caring staff in the world. Anything that will help him help himself will be here. Here will be the future. Go to it, Avi. You walk down to the walls of the temple courtyard and you see there the ancient streets. And you think, behind these stones were the Jewish people who 2,000 years ago stood and fought the Romans. And as you go from the western wall towards Mount Scopus, you come across the monument where 78 Hadassah and university people were killed. And you think to yourself, here are the names of people, human beings who stood behind this memorial stone. And these people carried certain ideals. And when eventually you come to Mount Scopus, you can see there the stones of Hadassah's hospital rising once again. But you know that it is not the stones alone which will matter, but the people who will be working behind them, continuing the same chain of ideas which link the Jewish heritage and Jewish contributions across 5,000 years of history. In the year 70, the Roman Emperor Titus stood on Mount Scopus looking down upon the golden city of Jerusalem and said, "Judea captured." And just as Jerusalem survived Titus, so the bruised and beaten hospital on Mount Scopus rises again today as the symbol of the Jewish people who have ever risen from the ashes of destruction and the assaults of persecution to bring life and love and healing to mankind. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. Let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, if I remember thee not.